A very good morning to the panel of judges, my fellow speakers, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Divya Sasikumar, and today I will be moderating our discussion entitled Depression Among Teenagers, a Silent Killer. Before we begin our discussion, I would like to introduce the panel of speakers who will be sharing their thoughts and opinions with us today. To my right, we have Ms. Debbie, followed by Ms. Sophia. And to my left will be Ms. Yashi, followed by Ms. Diane. Depression among teenagers is a topic widely discussed in this day and time, given the alarming increase in the number of suicide attempts and self-harm cases. Recent studies show that suicide is the third leading cause of death among 15 to 19-year-olds, and only 30% of teens receive the required treatment for depression. This is mainly due to the cause that depression is one of the most misunderstood mental illness according to many psychologists, and this is also due to the fact that there is insufficient awareness among people regarding depression. With that being said, I would like to invite Ms. Sophia to enlighten us more on what is depression and what are the consequences.
Thank you, Ms. Moderator. There have been numerous incidents of teen suicides owing to depression, commonly caused by variables such as family dynamics, peer pressure, and exam stress. So we can see that youth having depression nowadays is no joke anymore. Many of them are suffering in silence. So what is depression or major depressive disorder? It is a serious medical condition that affects one's emotions, thoughts, and their behavioral health. Thankfully, it is also curable. Sadness or a loss of interest in their previous hobbies are symptoms of depression that is commonly, I could say, very common factors. It can impair their ability of their performance, whether it's at work or their home, or like teens at college or university.
I'd like to ask you, Sophia, on what are the major groups that are affected by this?
In my opinion, I could say that depression can affect anyone at any age, any time, and cause them to doubt their existence. So why is it we call it as a silent killer? Because it messes with our brain. It harms that one particular person physically, mentally, and their behavioral health. The individual will then feel abandoned and ignored and will crave for seclusion. There is no age limit to this life-threatening disorder. It can happen to anyone at any time, and I can see that Malaysia has 5.5 million of them, and half of them are enrolled in school. So what age are these teens? I could say that teens that I'm stating here is 13 to 17 years old. Yeah, and according to the 2017 National Mental Health Survey, at least 1 in every 10 young people, or according to the 5.5 million, 10% of them had considered suicide. So teenage years can be difficult. We struggle with our exam and our daily life, the people around us, society, physical changes in our body, peer pressure, and increasing sense of social anxiety.
Thank you, Ms. Sophia, for the illuminating explanation. Now, I'm curious about the cases that has occurred locally and globally. So, Ms. Deborah, would you care to share your thoughts?
Thank you, Ms. Moderator. Good morning, everybody. So, as I would like to highlight again the seriousness of this issue happening in our country and globally as well. It is known that around 51% of our youth aged 13 to 17, as mentioned by Ms. Sophia, are affected by depression, according to the Polis Diraja Malaysia. Now, in Malaysia, which is a part of the ASEAN, Southeast Asian nations, the number of suicide cases are comparably low here as compared to countries outside of ASEAN. However, the one thing that is significant about this is that Malaysia criminalizes attempted suicide. This is, in my opinion, something that is unjust and it shouldn't happen in this country, as those who are affected by depression should not be punished for it, as stated just now, it's a medical condition. However, I can't shake off the merit because it does help in curtailing the low number of suicide cases in our country. Leanne, what do you think?
I think that criminalization of attempts at suicide should not be abolished, because I think it is the right thing to do. Maybe not criminalizing, but them trying to seek out for help before attempting suicide.
I totally agree with that. I think it should be at least reworked to include the prevention of suicide by helping them get mental treatment beforehand, before the suicide itself occurs. Now, moving on to the cases locally, there has been a noted case of suicide happening to a Malaysian girl who is at the age of 16 at the time of her death. Now, it is noted that she was found dead only 5 hours after posting on her Instagram story. Her Instagram story contained a poll which said, "Choose live or live or death." And to my shock and horror, around 69% of them chose death. The ironic thing is, had her audience chosen live, she would have probably sought out help instead. Now, moving across the waters, in America, there was a girl by the name of McKenna Brown who was 16, not too much younger from all of us here. She too was found dead in her apartment after being bullied online, which is now a thing of the current age, which teenagers do suffer most at these times. Now, as teenagers today, what are the main reasons for this? I could say first, suicide is caused by the lack of friendship, as mentioned by Sophia just now, and seclusion. So yeah, those are my points for today.
Thank you, Ms. Debbie. I'm pretty sure all of us here feel very heartbroken listening to such grisly cases about our like-minded peers, because they chose suicide instead of leading happy lives filled with opportunities just like us. I would like to know more about what are the factors that causes depression in the first place. Ms. Yashri, would you care to share your thoughts?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Moderator, and good morning, everyone. I think I have a few factors that I think that are the dominant ones that cause depression among teenagers. My first factor would be stress and pressure. Many of us get stress and pressure, and some teenagers get them overly, and when they have too much to handle, they tend to get mental breakdowns. And when they get mental breakdowns, they forget to eat, they don't sleep much, and because of this, they have, they suffer with their mental state. And when they suffer with their mental state, they have false thoughts. And when they have false thoughts, they tend to drink and smoke and take drugs, thinking that it can calm the situation and themselves. My second factor would be bullying. Bullying is a common thing that actually isn't supposed to be common, and I feel like teenagers in school especially, or in college, in universities, and so when the bully and to the individual, they will not know how the individual is affected, and when it is affected, and when they are affected, and when they are affected, they tend to get, lose their self-confidence, and they tend to think that they are not worth, and they feel like they aren't supposed to be in this world, and because of that, they do things like suicidal.
Ms. Yashri, you mentioned bullying and stress and pressure that cause depression, but I'm curious to know, some studies show that teenagers who were raised in problematic households are more likely to be diagnosed with depression compared to teenagers who were raised in healthier households. What is your point of view on that?
I definitely agree that family is one of the main factors that should be taken care of as a teenager. And as for a teenager, we grew up by our family surroundings, and the first people that we are exposed is our family, as exposing love and care. So I feel that if our family don't love us ourselves, how are we gonna think and also care for ourselves instead? So I feel like family, when they don't care and when they don't show us the affection that it is needed, the children or teenagers, they think that that they aren't loved, that they aren't welcomed in this world, that they aren't belong, and they tend to think that they should just stick in their room and not come out because they feel like they're an embarrassment to their families. And when they think that they get mental breakdown, they cry, and they have thoughts suicidal, and I've seen a lot and I've heard a lot of things and people saying that some of the children actually get so mentally abused by their own thoughts itself. And also losing a loved one can also affect your mental health like really badly. Losing someone that you love can really put you down in that dark space where you feel like they are the ones that made you feel welcome, that they were the ones that actually cared for you. And when you feel that they're gone, you will feel really empty when they're not. So when they do that, they lock themselves in the room and they have thoughts saying that why should I be alive when they are not? So should I commit suicide to just be with them? And so that's when they do that. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Yashri. So those are some factors that causes depression. Although it seems impossible, every cloud has a silver lining. Therefore, I'd like to invite Ms. Diane to end our lugubrious discussion and bring some hope by sharing some efforts that can be taken to overcome or cope with depression.
Thank you, Ms. Moderator. Individual effort can be taken by talking to people who you trust about how you've been feeling. When you're sad or when you're angry with something, you should tell the people that are making you feel those things so that you don't have to overwhelm yourselves with these feelings. As a member of society, we should learn about depression and learn how to cope with their struggles and help them through their mental health journey. Out of all the efforts that can be taken and has the most power to end the stigmatization of depression and suicide, the government has the most power. The first step in this battle is to create a national strategy stating a clear commitment to suicide prevention. Currently, only 28 countries have such a strategy. Follow-up care by health workers for people who have attempted suicide is critical, as there are great risk of trying again instead of criminalizing attempted suicide. Social support within communities can help protect people who are vulnerable as well. Communities must provide nurturing environments to those who are vulnerable, and governments can set a good example to enable them to do so. Worldwide, the prevention of suicide has not been adequately addressed due to a lack of awareness of suicide. As a major problem, and the taboo in many societies to openly discuss the fact, only a few countries have included prevention of suicide among their priorities. It is clear that the suicide prevention requires intervention also from outside the health sector and calls for an innovative, comprehensive multi-sectoral approach, including both health and non-health sectors. Example, justice, religion, law, politics, the media, and most importantly, education. That is all.
Ms. Diane, you mentioned some major government bodies that could help with depression, but I have a question. Depression ranges in severity. Some could be mild and some could be really severe. For the severe cases, those government bodies could help them by seeking help. But what about the mild cases? What would you suggest for them?
I think that when it comes to the mild cases, I think that those individuals who are suffering from these mild depression should try to find someone that they trust, that they can talk about these feelings with. This could be a teacher, a relative, a friend. Besides that, I think that they can find new hobbies to distract themselves from these very negative thoughts. Another point as well, I think that exercising is a really good way to distract yourself from these thoughts and overcome this feeling of mild depression. Yoga is a very good example of that. That is all.
To add on to your point, Dian, I feel that nowadays, as technology has become more advanced, media such as Discord could be used to meet new people online because, as stated before, depressive tend to prefer seclusion, thus do not have the confidence to meet people in real life. So in order to seek out help, they could use platforms such as Discord and Twitch to be able to connect with people through their love of, for example, sports that you mentioned, through platforms online.
Thank you, Ms. Demi and Ms. Dian. Ladies and gentlemen, one's teen years are full of significant changes. Physically, mentally, socially, your brain, body, and environment will go through a major evolution. To develop depression at such a vulnerable stage of your life can be truly harmful to emotional well-being. To add insult to injury, the consequences of failing to address adolescent depression can prolong to their adulthood, which causes physical and mental conditions that will lead them to lead unfulfilling lives as adults. Therefore, we as a panel of speakers hope that we made a change with our discussion and we gave more information to raise awareness regarding depression among teenagers. Thank you.
A very good morning to everyone. My name is Tierney, your moderator for today. The topic that we'll be discussing is depression among teenagers, a silent killer. Depression is a medical illness that negatively affects the way we feel, the way we think, as well as the way we act, and might even lead to suicide in the worst case scenario. The number of people suffering from depression nowadays is increasing every year, and of course, teenagers are included. Teenagers nowadays are living in a way more stressful environment, and this leads to the extremely high suicide rate among teenagers in Malaysia as well. Can you believe that a report by UNICEF had shown that just from January to May 2021, as many as 872 teenagers in Malaysia committed suicide, and depression is one of the main killer. With that being said, with me today we have Shreya, Audrey, Mel, and Aaron as our panelists. They are all students from different backgrounds and they will be sharing their thoughts and view regarding this topic. So without further ado, shall we start with Mel, as she looks super excited today. So what do you think regarding this topic?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. First of all, good morning everyone and hello to my fellow panelists. Well, according to my reading of this topic, mental health disorder apparently can run in family and can be passed down from parent to child. This is to say that this risk can increase even more if both parents have a mental health disorder. Though there are no specific genes that we can look at and trace to depression, if our family members have had depression, we can have it too. But the key question that has to arise in minds of anybody watching this now is, why do people think clinical depression is genetic and whether it is a silent killer? Well, you see, a person who grows up with someone with depression, especially a parent or parents, may be more susceptible to the condition. This is because when parents suffer from clinical depression, their interactions with their children, in particular their ability to respond sensitively to their children's needs and interests, are negatively affected. Parental depression shapes not only a parent's perception of the world, but also a child's experience of the world internally and externally. Parents are really critical to a child development. So if a child witnesses a parent struggle with depression, it is possible they might develop a pessimistic outlook on life, which is a risk factor for depression.
Mel, sorry, may I interrupt?
Yes, Audrey?
So you say that parental depression shapes a child's outlook on life? I'm a bit confused about that. Mind elaborating more?
Thank you, Audrey. Well, our outlook on life can be heavily influenced by the people who we spend a lot of time with early on. Because if a child has regular exposure to negative thinking, they may not only develop a negative worldview, but they may also be lacking a positive example on how to overcome challenges. Well, an inability to properly handle situation can lead to depression down the road. And this is because in adolescence, our emotions are intense and vulnerable, so emotional dysregulation can be a causative factor. Plus, if a child has a parent who is really hindered and hampered by depression, it is only going to make it hard for the parents to help their children with their own emotional regulation. As I see it, and often a silent threat to young children's mental health is actually the mental health of the parents. In other words, I believe that depression is indeed a silent killer among teenagers. Thank you. That's all for me.
Alright, thank you so much, Mel, for sharing your thoughts with us. And I'm also sure that Audrey is really clear on what Mel spoke about earlier. So, shall we move on to Aaron? So, what do you think regarding this topic?
Thank you, Moderator. Since Mel have mentioned about how parents have a role to play when it comes to curbing depression, I think this correlates to how the perception of the public causes depression. Now, it is a common consensus that depression is still considered a topic of taboo. Even Tom Cruise, an A-list celebrity, have outrightly proclaimed that depression is pseudoscience. Well, I think he is living proof that good looks and intelligence are mutually exclusive. Good-looking people cannot be smart. Jokes aside, depression is often swept under the rug. Worst case scenario, a depressed person who expresses their struggles will be automatically labeled as crazy. However, I want to play the devil advocate in this and say that it is understandable why people's perception of depression is not serious. This is because oftentimes a depressed person would put on a normal or cheerful facade. It is extremely difficult for the public to determine whether someone has depression or not. So, is depression really a silent killer among teenagers? I will leave it up to everyone to decide. Since mental health and depression is stigmatized by the public, it is extremely difficult for teenagers to release their emotions and as well as seek for treatment. This is because if they express their worries and struggles with depression to elders, their elders might claim it is just a normal phase that they're going through because of puberty. They might also say that it's normal because it's hormonal imbalance. On the other hand, if they open up to their peers might say that it is just a facade or cry for attention. Teenagers affected by depression will be stuck between a rock and a hard place. All these pent-up emotions that are not expressed out loud would aggravate symptoms of depression and eventually lead a teenager to
Aaron,
suicide.
may I interrupt?
Yes.
A while ago, you have mentioned that pent-up emotion would lead to suicide. Is there any way to release these pent-up emotions?
Thank you for the good question, Mel. Now, the most obvious or textbook answer I would give to that is to confide in someone you can trust, be it your family members or your friends. If your case is a little bit more severe, I would suggest you go to therapy or you meet a psychologist. But with mental health still being a stigma here in Malaysia, I don't think Malaysians necessarily are the right place for you to vent your emotions. And I do know that therapy is extremely pricey in Malaysia and that not everyone have the privilege. So I would like to propose one alternative that I think would really help you release your emotions, and that being writing down your emotions in a piece of paper or a journal. Writing things down, especially your emotions, will definitely relax your mind and will clear your train of thoughts as well as let your emotions run out. So I suggest everyone who do not have the means to properly release their emotions use this rather unorthodox method to release their emotions. I hope that answers your question.
Yes,
Mel.
definitely.
Aaron, so I actually have a small question here. So you have mentioned earlier that patients that suffer from depression are usually labeled as crazy, right? So do you think it is possible for us Malaysians to actually break this mindset?
Thank you, Moderator. As I've mentioned earlier, depression is still a stigma here in Malaysia. This is why I really applaud parents who acknowledge that their child is suffering from depression and will often accompany them to therapy. But just to strengthen my points on why I still think depression is considered a stigma here in Malaysia, even though there are parents who accompany their child to therapy, I want to ask those parents these two burning questions. Are you open about your child's struggles with depression? And are you embarrassed that your child is suffering from depression? Well, please reflect on those questions, dear parents. Now, to answer your question, Mr. Moderator, I believe that when it comes to solving problems, you have to identify the root cause. In this case, I think the root cause of depression still being a stigma is the schools. Schools should definitely start teaching their young students about depression and mental health since primary school. Educators should also urge their students to open up about their struggles with depression and not to be hesitant at all to talk about depression. Other than that, the school should also be a safe place for students to vent their emotion and for them to talk about depression. It should always be an open conversation. I hope that answers your question, Mr. Moderator.
Alright, thank you so much, Aaron, for answering my question, and thank you as well for your amazing ideas that you have mentioned earlier. So next, shall we move on to Audrey? So what do you have to say regarding this topic?
Thank you, Moderator. Well, first, I would like to agree with Mel how parental depression can change a child's outlook on life. However, I would like to continue on from Aaron's topic about therapy. I would like to focus more on therapy in general, hospitals to be specific. Now, personally, from my experience, I have found that their treatment to be ineffective. Now, why do I say this? Is because that whenever I schedule an appointment, rather than seeing just one psychiatrist, I would actually meet multiple psychiatrists. So each session was a different psychiatrist. Now, how this works is that the psychiatrist who would meet me for that day, the only thing they would know about me are notes from the previous psychiatrist, or by asking me questions that all the same psychiatrist would ask. And this may be ineffective because I found that it could be that this can be a lack of in-depth analysis, which can actually may cause them to diagnose a patient wrong or give them antidepressants when it may not even be needed, especially since we know that there are many other ways to curb depression. Not only that, I found that this can be ineffective because patients who have to undergo this repetitiveness may feel that it is not working for them and that they are the only ones who can possibly understand themselves. And not only that, meeting different psychiatrists may not be comfortable. So they feel that is no sense of comfortability and they may hide things from their psychiatrist. Hence why they may actually refuse to seek further treatment. And this can actually increase the symptoms of depression or suicidal thoughts experienced by the teenager.
Audrey, if I may interject, can I ask why exactly you went through such a system where you rotated through psychiatrists? Because in my experience, when I had to go for therapy, I was assigned only one psychiatrist over the course of my treatment.
That's a good question, Shreya. Well, if you are given referral notes from, for example, by your school to meet a psychiatrist, then it is possible to meet one psychiatrist for one session. But if you are a patient coming from the outside and willingly choosing to go for therapy at a hospital, it is most likely that you will end up in a case scenario such as mine. So why the system is the way it is, it's actually because the recommended psychiatrist to patient ratio by WHO is actually 1 to 10,000. However, Malaysia is merely 0.1 to 10,000 instead. So Malaysia actually requires at least 3,100 psychiatrists to properly cover the entire population and give effective and proper treatment. So the lack of doctors interested in the psychology field to be a psychiatrist or a therapist, and too many patients coming in is the reason why they are forced to undergo a system of rotation of psychiatrists. Thank you.
Audrey, so you have mentioned that there are too many patients coming in to basically seek treatments, right?
Mm-hmm.
So do you still think that depression among teenagers is still a silent killer?
That's an excellent question, Moderator. Well, as we know, and as Aaron has mentioned, depression is still stigmatized by society. So when people do choose to go for therapy, it is usually a last resort, and is usually by then a very severe case. However, when therapy no longer works for them and they found it does not work and the symptoms are still there, the patient may lose hope. And parents who are supportive of their teenagers going for therapy, when they send their children to a professional, they expect them to be cured of it. However, teenagers such as ourselves, I think we can all relate that we want to please our parents. But when that does not happen, we keep it to ourselves and we keep quiet about it. Hence why I still think depression is a silent killer.
Alright, thank you so much, Audrey, for answering my questions, and your points were great as well. So last but not least, let's have Shreya to share her points with us.
Thank you, moderator. And while I definitely agree with all my fellow panelists and the points they brought up, I personally feel that outliers have a larger role to play in the cause of depression, especially amongst teenagers. By outliers in this context, I am specifically referring to drugs and medication. Now let's first talk about drugs. Considering the reach of cartels today, it's definitely very easily accessible to teenagers, and as such, they are more likely to grow addicted to such drugs such as cocaine, marijuana, or weed. Now, in their cycle of addiction, which spurs on from their desire to get an adrenaline rush, to constantly feel thrill and entertainment, and to not feel bored, they also subsequently expose themselves to the risk of depression. Now, why do I say this? Drug usage is something that will start and end in a vicious cycle of addiction. And drug usage basically is where you're constantly putting the same foreign substances over again and again into your body. Now, when the same things are entering your bloodstream over a prolonged period of time, when this happens, what the body does, it begins to get used to the effect, especially since it's entering your body so many times, and as such, over a prolonged period of usage of these drugs, your body fails to emulate the same feelings. And the brain will then start going further back into a depressive episode simply because it's unable to get that same intensity of sensation, and that's what will spur on teenagers to try out more dangerous and more foreign substances. Now let's move on to medication. I'm sure as fellow teenagers, we've all experienced a bad case of acne breakout. And as such, I'm sure that if we had access to certain miracle medication, we would definitely have jumped at the chance to use it. An example of such a miracle medication would definitely be isotretinoin. Isotretinoin is an acne treatment that is said to have a success rate of 77% in curing non-inflammatory acne and 78% in curing inflammatory acne. Also, considering the fact that it only takes you 12 weeks of usage of isotretinoin to clear up your acne, it certainly seems like the best option for any teenager with a bad case of acne. But what teenagers do not realize is that no matter how miraculous this medication seems, it's actually got a very dark side to it. Ironically, what started as a venture to simply blow up your self-confidence, to be able to present yourself in public without feeling ashamed of how you look, is what will lead to the ultimate downfall of your mental health. Now, why do I say this? When you think of it, isotretinoin is a chemical component, and this chemical component is especially capable of altering neurotransmitters transfer in the brain. And as such, this will affect regions of the brain that can cause depression. Now, how does this all tie back in?
Sorry, Shreya, if I may interrupt. Isotretinoin has been banned from hitting the pharmacy shelves since 2018, and that also by the Malaysian Ministry of Health, and that also includes online purchases. So how does your argument still stand?
Thank you, Aaron, and that's certainly a very common question asked. But when you think of it, considering the current technology that's available to teenagers, and especially how adept teenagers in this age generation are of using it, it's certainly not a problem for them, ban or otherwise. As long as they are able to block their IP address, either via some kind of manual code or through a VPN, they will be able to access these isotretinoins online just with a credit card or a mailing address. And as such, some teenagers even are able to use backdoor routes to pharmacies and doctors, since they do have family, friends and such to procure this medication for them. Now, how does this all tie back into drugs and such medication being a silent killer and as it causes depression? Is the fact that you never know what you're getting yourself into. What started simply as a way to get your fun or simply to feel good about yourself will be the ultimate downfall of your mental health, and you will not realize the effects until it's far too late. And that's all from me, thank you.
Alright, thank you so much, Shreya, for sharing your thoughts with us. And I'm pretty sure that Aaron's question is perfectly answered. So now that all our panelists have given their thoughts and opinion regarding our topic today, allow me to quickly sum up all the information that we have heard so far. So first, we have Mel speaking on parents and family members being a cause of depression among teenagers, as depression can actually run in family. And then we have Aaron speaking on depression being a sensitive topic, and that the patients that suffer from depression will often be labeled as crazy, so they will not actually open up about their problems, and these will definitely lead to depression among teenagers as well. Then we have Audrey speaking on depression the treatments of depression being ineffective in government hospitals because the patients will sometimes need to meet several different psychiatrists or psychologists. And last but not least, we have Shreya speaking on substance abuse as well as usage of certain medications such as isotretinoin, which definitely leads to depression among teenagers as well. So at the end of the day, everyone actually plays a role in order for us to reduce the number of patients suffering from depression, especially teenagers in Malaysia. So the final question is depression among teenagers really a silent killer? I will leave that question to the audience. And it seems that that's the end of our forum today. Once again, thank you so much to our panelists and audience for making this forum possible. Hope to see you all again next time. Stay safe and bye.
A very good morning. I'm Daniela Faith Mahadevan from College Tingkatan 6 Forest Heights, and I'll be your moderator for today's forum. Joining me on this forum, we have Karthika, we have Yuring, we have Anushri, and Karina. Thank you so much for joining. On today's forum, our main header is on a silent killer among teenagers, depression. You know, the first thought that comes into mind is when a teenager questions themselves, am I just sad or am I depressed? So Karthika, how are we supposed to differentiate both of these?
Well, to put it in simple terms, sadness is an emotion, whereas depression is a mental illness. And I think that the ability to differentiate these two from one another is crucial, because in this time and day, people ever so easily confuse those two and use them interchangeably with one another, which is a very ignorant and callous thing to do. So every single one of us experiences sadness every now and then when something doesn't go our way. And as a teenager, something as little as getting a C on a test would trigger feelings of sadness. But this feeling will go away within a few hours or at most a few days. Whereas depression, on the other hand, might not even have a specific trigger, and it consumes us as a whole. So the question is, how do we recognize whether we're sad or depressed? So when your feelings of sadness and loneliness last for more than 2 weeks with no signs of it ever getting better, then chances are you're probably struggling with mild depression. As for more severe cases of depression, one might think about or even attempt suicide. They may feel as if their presence in the world makes no difference to the people around them, and so they would start disassociating themselves from things or hobbies that they used to love, or they would start distancing themselves from their friends and families. They would even display physical symptoms like a drastic change in their weight. So this will never be the case with sadness. So there is a very thin line between sadness and depression. A line that is so thin that it is very easy to overlook it. Therefore, I think that it is very important for us to educate ourselves on the key points that distinguishes sadness from depression, so as not to overreact to regular human feelings, or even worse, brush off a major depressive episode that requires treatment as just regular feelings of sadness.
Well said there, Karthika. And how you emphasize on the importance in distinguishing, sadness and depression. Where sadness is just a normal human emotion and depression is a mental illness. Now going back to our main header, where depression is a silent killer. Karina, why is depression known as a silent killer and how does it affect both genders among teenagers?
I, for one, think that the prescribed roles that society has forced upon us is a reason why depression is a silent killer among teenagers nowadays. For example, teenage boys nowadays do tend to pick up on a certain mindset called toxic masculinity. What is toxic masculinity, you ask? Toxic masculinity is a culture that glorifies stoic behavior and domineering and dominance among men. For example, let me give you an example of a boy who starts to feel beside himself, wants to ask his friends for any consolation or advice, but instead of being given so, he is told to be a man and to ignore such trivial feelings. This is where toxic masculinity starts. As for females, we also have a similar concept called toxic femininity, which is where a woman is told to act into the box of stereotypes that society has labeled on us as being weak and subservient towards a dominant man. I, for one, am always called a loud person by fellow females and am told, you are too loud, men do not like loud women. It is this social stigma that suppresses our youth and turns depression into a silent killer, because you have the boys that do not want to be seen as weak and they bottle up their emotions, and then you have the girls that don't want to feed into their own stereotype of being seen as weak or too emotional, and they have become closed off.
Thank you so much, Karina. It's a sad reality that we live in today, this toxic mentality, this gender stereotype among youths, and how it has suppressed their true feelings and how they actually feel. Now, Ewing, is there any other reason on why depression is a silent killer?
Thank you, Moderator. Depression is called the silent killer because it has no obvious symptoms, no objective diagnostic test for this illness, no x-rays, and no way to forecast if depression will happen to a specific person. What Karina said just now are the external factors that makes someone suppress their feelings of depression. On the internal part, self-denial thoughts inhibits a person with depression to not talk about the topic. This is because they will feel that they are putting someone they love in a position to lend a helping hand to them. Since depression is related to guilt, teenagers with depression tend to feel guilty for burdening people around them, but in reality, they should actually not feel like that since depression is not a choice.
Well, I love how you ended that. Depression is not a choice, people. And how you stated the symptoms are not obvious. So it's just, it makes me wonder, can we actually identify? Is there a way? Are there any telltale signs, Anu?
Thank you, Moderator. Delusional perception. Have you ever heard of this term? Let me explain. You see, delusional perception is when a depressed person starts talking about suicidal thoughts, life, death, and feelings which are not real. You see, delusional perception can be identified by phrases such as, nobody loves me, we are all going to die, and our mind is a prison. This goes hand in hand with the fact that delusional perception is one of the most dominant telltale signs of depression. The World Health Organization has warned us repeatedly that depression is the leading cause of disability among teens worldwide. This validates the importance of managing this fatal disease. We need to take this seriously because the consequences could be fatal if no action is taken.
Well, thank you there, Anu, on how you stated on the term delusional perception. Actually, I've never heard of that term, but I've actually seen this type of behavior, this verbal behavior in Twitter, in social media, where teens, post their suicidal thoughts, and we actually should take note of this. Are there any more telltale signs, Karina?
I think a very apparent telltale sign is the changes in an individual's personality. Our personality defines us. When you see a person who is very open, very talkative, suddenly become so closed off, does it not raise concerns about the person's well-being? It does. Moreover, when speaking about personality, you can also relate it to mood swings. A person going through depression can have very sudden mood swing changes from being happy 1 second to being sad. I, for one, had an experience with this with a friend who 1 week she would be very cheerful, very outgoing, and suddenly the next week she would become very closed off and introverted even. It does raise a big concern, and I believe that personality changes is a very apparent telltale sign when it comes to depression among teenagers.
Thank you so much. These both behaviors, on verbal behavior, drastic personality change, drastic mood change can be a telltale sign, and we should actually take notice of that. Now, moving on to a more interesting question that I have for Karthika, nature versus nurture in the aspects of depression.
Thank you, Faith, for bringing up that interesting concept. So many studies prove that both nature and nurture come hand in hand in contributing to the development of depression. So nurture in this context refers to environmental factors, whereas nature refers to genetic predisposition. So let's talk about nurture first. So many environmental factors contribute to depression. For example, a person's upbringing, substance abuse, or even childhood trauma. So childhood trauma refers to domestic violence, sexual or physical abuse, neglect, bullying, or even grief-related trauma from losing a loved one to death. So many mental illnesses like depression stem from childhood trauma because these type of trauma happens when our brains are still developing and we're not mature enough or old enough to understand our emotions on a deeper level. So moving on to nature. Like I said, nature refers to genetic predisposition. So when we mention genes here, people automatically assume that it means we inherit depression on its own as an illness from our parents. But nature is a lot more complex than that. What nature refers to here, a very good example of nature is hormonal changes that happen especially during puberty. So in other words, it's something internal that cannot be affected or changed by an external factor. So when we talk about hormonal changes, the problem arises when teenagers do not know how to cope with the changes that happen from within. So this can be overwhelming to a lot of teens and could potentially cause depression. So when a person with compromised genes, meaning they have genes associated with depression, is exposed to certain type of trauma, they are more susceptible to developing depression because their genes have been compromised. As opposed to some neurotypical person who would have a better chance at dealing with their emotions because their genes would not be compromised. So in the debate of nature versus nurture in terms of depression, the question still remains, does one trump the other? So there was a study in 2016 that suggested that a person's environment could potentially override genetic predisposition. So the study proved that depression in a teenager can be overcome by using cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a form of nurture. So the takeaway from this is that, yes, sure, nature and nurture does come hand in hand, but only in the development of depression. When it comes to overcoming depression, nurture trumps nature in a way where it gives us a fair chance at battling depression.
Thank you so much, Kartika. That was so informative, And I really love the last sentence of how you said, nurture overrides nature in the sense of overcoming this issue by, having a healthy environment and where family comes in to provide this healthy environment as a support system. So, Karina, is there any other support system that, teenagers can hold on to?
Spiritual belief has been a very proven method in helping teens manage depression. Faith. We all have faith within us, within our families, within a higher entity. Faith is there to help us and can be a solace from our problems. Although I say this, faith should not be used as a safety net to fall upon, rather it should be used as a rope to hang on to for guidance. I say this also because faith is there with us our whole lives when we get disappointed by our life or by people. It is easier for people to believe in the unseen rather than see the reality of life.
Thank you so much, Karina. I really love this because it relates to our first principle in the Rukun Negara, kepercayaan kepada Tuhan, on how that teenagers can hold on to that rope as a support system. Now, I just want to go on a larger scale. As a community, how can we help teenagers overcome this issue? Ewing?
Yes, thank you, moderator. As what Karina has said, spirituality and faith is the rope that teens hang on to when they are having depression. But besides that, we can have scaffolding to provide support to teens that are dealing with this mental illness. One of it is by education. An admirable example, which is Hailey Hardcastle, that is a teen that teamed up with her friends to come up with this law called House Bill 2191. House Bill 2191 is just a law that simply helps teenagers that is dealing with depression to initiate conversation with their parents. There is this triangle effect that comes into hand. One of it is the teenagers. First of all, the teens that are feeling overwhelmed, overworked, and think that they need some break can ask their parents, where the parents actually calls the schools to excuse the absence of their child. From this, the parents takes time to chill with their children and hear what they have to say about their mental health state. And the schools play a role since that they are actually recording this mental health day taken by students similar to physical health days. They can record how many mental health days that are taken by students. If one takes too many mental health days, then they can redirect them to professionals in order to seek help before anything comes too late.
Thank you so much, Yuri. On how you stated, it just makes me imagine the law, House Bill 2191, if it was, applied in our education system, it would just, create this triangle effect, the school, the parent, and the student. How amazing is that we can actually overcome this issue? There is a hope. And she also said that we can, the students will be referred to professional help. So Anu, what are the methods, through professional help that we can actually help teenagers overcome this issue?
Thank you, Moderator. I agree with what was said by Ewing that education plays a key role in managing depression. However, I also believe that professional help does play a role in this issue. I would like to tell a story. One day, Dr. Sam, a doctor in the poor part of East London, received a patient called Lisa. You see, Lisa is someone who has been battling chronic depression and crippling anxiety for 7 years. Her story is so tragic because she never left home, she barely socialized and became lonely. When Lisa first came to Sam's center, she was told that she will still be given the same medication, but she also has to come to the center twice a week to cooperate with other patients and also talk to them and figuring out things that they can do together which are more beneficial for them. During the first meet, Lisa and the other participants were talking to each other, and Lisa started vomiting out of anxiety. The other participants started comforting her and talking to her. Soon, they decided that they will do gardening, as they saw empty land behind the office and saw an opportunity to plant some beautiful flowers. While gardening, they talked to each other. They started laughing, crying, and knowing more about each other. You see, with this, Lisa and the other participants started improving rapidly and making progress in managing their depression. This method is known as social prescribing. It does not only involve gardening but also activities such as laughing, dancing, and singing. In John Harry's book, Lost Connections, the author described it in simple terms as a method of referring other patients or preferring depressed patients to support from their own community. As said, in Lisa's words, as the garden started to bloom, their heart started to bloom.
Wow, that is an amazing story. 7 years of depression and she found a breakthrough. It's just a hope and a light for teenagers out there. Just by this simple method called social prescribing. And I just want to thank all the panelists for your, informative, the informative discussion that we had. To sum it up, I would just like to say, to sum it up, the first discussion was on, am I just sad or am I depressed was answered, and there is a big difference in both of, sadness and depression. We also touched on why is it a silent killer, and it was stated based on, toxic mindset, gender stereotype, self-denial, and the symptoms are not obvious, which makes teen, to suppress their emotion. And we even went on with the telltale signs. Since the symptoms are not obvious, the telltale signs are through verbal behavior and also the drastic personality and mood changes. And as well, we touched on a very interesting topic called nature versus nurture in the aspects of depression, and where there was a hope, nurture overrides nature in overcoming this issue. We also went on spiritual belief, which is our first principle. How amazing is that? And also we touched on a larger scale on how to overcome this issue. We went on education and also professional help just through a simple method called social prescribing. Just a small reminder for everyone out there. If you're going through a hard time, don't ever, just seek. If you're going through a hard time, you may seek help from your loved ones. And always remember, you are wanted and loved. For emotional support, you may call 0376 272929. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum and a very good afternoon right now it is. My name is Dr. Abdullah Muhammad Nawi from UTM and I am the Chief Judge for your competition today. And first of all, I'd just like to say to everybody, good job, and it was such a pleasure for me to watch all of you having very good, deep, engaging discussions where you had lots of points and they all came together in a nice little package of this forum. So that's a really good job, well done. Congratulations to all of you. And I think by now you should know who the winners are, and if you don't, then you will know very, very soon. But for now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to give you some feedback on the performance that you gave in the forum competition, and I'm going to go through the comments one by one, but I'm not going to be focusing on specific groups because most of the comments that I'm going to give are general in nature and they are applicable to all the groups. So let's get started, shall we? Now, first of all, I'm just going to give you some general feedback, and the general feedback that I want to give you is, again, like I said before, a job well done. I think all of you, every single one of you, managed to show that you were able to express your ideas, you were able to back up your thoughts with facts and figures, with the research that you did, and you tied these ideas together to make a very good, very organized pieces of information where you presented them within the format of a forum. So that's generally what we had, a good performance all round. Some groups were better than others. Most of you were on the same or very similar trends, very similar wavelengths, and it was hard for us to come to a decision for one or two of you, but generally, again, a job well done. The performance that we had, now this is the one that I'd like to give a little bit of feedback on, and the performance was that in terms of the speeches, I think almost everybody gave good, fluent speeches. As to the quality, there were some varying aspects of the performance which gave way to good performances, better performances, and performance that needed perhaps a bit more rehearsal or a bit more attention. But generally, again, a job well done. Now, when we talk about the ideas that you gave, some of you gave ideas that were very matured, very attentive to detail, and you had quotations where you cited from various sources. Now, this is a very good thing to do, and you will note that even as you go into the world of university, you're going to notice that you're going to need more and more of this, where you need to have points to back up your ideas, to substantiate them. So this is a very good bit of training for you to do, where you say something and you back it up with something, you back it up with proof or with statistics or whatever. So that's very, very good, a good practice for you to do. And next, I'd like to talk about your language. So I think all of you had good language, which was very pleasing for me because I am involved in Mewah as well. And when I have a look at the performance of students in Moet, it gives me great pleasure when I see the students and the candidates being able to speak well, to express themselves. So that gives me joy, and it gave me joy to watch how you guys spoke. In terms of the language proficiency, I was blown away by quite a few of you where you had very good language. Your vocabulary was extended. You could play about with the words and phrases, and this really adds another level of depth into your performance as you do this kind of presentation work. So again, job well done on that. So I've talked about the points, I've talked about the language, I've talked about the fluency, and with some of you, you still have some ways to go when you talk about fluency, where you may tend to use fillers, and this is something which is very natural, that it happens to students or even to people who are not well versed in the other language. So their brain, while they're thinking, they say the sound. So the better you are at the language, the more accustomed you are to thinking in the language, to speaking in the language, the better your output will be and the more fluent your language will be. So that's something which you may want to practice later on. Now, going on to this one. Now, this one is a little bit tricky because it is, if you get a chance to have a look at all the entries of the competition, you're going to find that there are some differences in how some of you approach the task, where some of you treat the task totally as a forum, and some of you treat the task more as a discussion. Now again, this is something where it's kind of hard to give something very definite, because if you talk about a format of a forum, normally that's what it is. It is the moderator asking a question, giving a turn to the panelist. Panelist takes 5-10 minutes, one extended turn, finishes up, and moderator then comments a little bit and then passes it on to the next panelist. Then there's a little bit of a Q&A session, which wasn't exactly what we saw here today. So what we saw here today was there were one of two formats. Number one was speak, 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 speak. Finish. Number two was speak a little bit, then moderator comments, and then speak a little bit, and then comment, and speak a little bit, and then it goes back there again. And there was another format where we just became a bit of a free-for-all as a discussion rather than a forum. Now this is not on the participants side, but it's more on the organizing part, where I think we need to really sit down and determine what exactly the format is. So format is important because it will determine how the interaction patterns will occur. So again, because of the difference in the understanding of the format, you could see that there are variations in how the whole competition was carried out. So that's something to think about. So here, moving on, talking about the points, I gave the feedback of the points having of being substantial, so that's very good. And here I'd like to add a little bit on moderation. Moderation means to say that the moderator. What is the role of the moderator? The role of the moderator is, number one, to get things going, and number two, to make it more interesting. So you have some moderators who merely pass the turn. You have some moderators who even go as to have a conversation. And this all comes into the format. So this depends on the format. Now, I have some constructive feedback before I end my session with you for today. One of the things that I would like to think about and I'd like you to practice is trying to come up with natural speech, because I do notice that some of you have memorized your scripts in your head. And when you memorize, it shows. The naturalness of the speech becomes affected. Some of you read. I saw that some of you were talking and then you were looking up and looking up and looking up. You were reading from something, or some of you were reading from the text that you had in your lap. So when you read, it affects the naturalness. I mean, you can refer, but don't read. So that's one of the things. Practice being natural. And the other part that I want to talk to you about is the language. Make sure that you try to make your language a little bit more rich, but at the same time, not too bombastic. You need people to understand you. And my last feedback for today is degrees of formality. Now remember that there is, for every event, for every occasion, there is always a set degree of formality. Is it a more formal setting? If it's a more formal setting, then you need to be a bit more formal. If it is informal, then you can be a bit more informal. Now, within a forum, it's slightly on the formal side. So if you were having a discussion like you're having a discussion with friends just behind the school, at the cafe, and so on. So it doesn't quite become a forum. There's nothing wrong with telling a few jokes, but remember that there is some decorum that comes with the format of a forum. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is basically my feedback. And once again, congratulations to everyone. And I hope that you enjoyed the experience. I know I have. And I hope to see you again, inshallah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good afternoon, everybody. Bye-bye.
Dengan berakhirnya persembahan sebentar tadi, maka berakhirlah majlis kita pada hari ini. Tahniah diucapkan kepada semua para pemenang. Semoga kemenangan ini menjadi penambah semangat untuk terus berjaya pada masa akan datang. Terima kasih juga diucapkan kepada semua yang terlibat dalam menjayakan majlis kali ini. Bunga dedap di atas para anak dusun pasang pelita. Kalau tersilap tutur bicara, jemari disusun, maaf dipinta. Di atas dahan burung tempua, melihat rusa tepi perigi. Salam perpisahan untuk semua. Di lain masa bersua lagi. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Jangan lupa tekan like dan subscribe. Sekian, terima kasih.